On this episode of the Cover 4 podcast, the guys look at the offensive weapons heading into the 2023 NFL Draft. We'll chat receivers, we'll chat running backs, but mostly Bijan Robinson, arguably the best running back prospect since Saquon Barkley. And we'll talk about the tight ends, which could also be another deep position in this draft. Stick around for more. Welcome to the Cover 4 podcast. I'm Nolan, that's Bradshaw, that's Luca, that is Jeff. Guys, I missed the last episode with the defensive players. That was a great episode. And we talked about you guys discussed how deep that was, especially the edge rushers. I'll have to mention Jalen Carter in the middle there, and it's a good corner class as well. But the receiver position has really been the deepest position for arguably probably since 2019. You think of that 2019 class, A.J. Brown, DK, Terry McLaurin, and then the 2020 class was unreal as well. 2021 gets started with Jamar Chase. Last year, again, it's only been 1 year, but you talk about Garrett Wilson wins Offensive Rookie of the Year. Not far behind him was Chris Olave. And then the Falcons, they took Drake London. If maybe there was some better quarterback play, maybe he punches over 1,000 yards there. Guys, consistently, these wide receivers are just getting better and better and better. And I think this class might be in the same tier as that 2019 one, but of course it's going to be too early to tell. But let's go all around the horn here. We've got, I would say, 4 guys that are pretty much locked into the first round, and then after that there's a few guys who might be the tail end of the first, early second, late second. But Bradshaw, why don't you get me started? Give me a top 3 for you in this class and what they do well.
It's interesting because I only I only think there's one guy that I would definitively would be like, yeah, this guy is a first round receiver. Everyone else I'd be like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, back end of the first, maybe second round. The one guy at the top is Jackson Smith-Njigba. I think he's pretty clearly, at least to me, the best receiver in this class. I think you saw it at Ohio State. You saw how talented he was. There's a ton of receivers that have come out of there, and pretty much everyone who's been there has said, he's kind of like, not if not the best one that's coming out. Garrett Wilson's been saying something like that, and I used to see another guy say this is the most talented receiver to come out. I don't know if I would agree with that. I think I loved Garrett Wilson when he was coming out, but I think that just Jackson Smith-Njigba is just a talented route runner, such a talented receiver. I think he's pretty clearly separated himself from everybody else in this class. After that, I think you could kind of have a bunch of guys that are kind of all grouped together, but I would probably go after him. I'd probably say Jordan Addison's number 2. I think he's kind of similar to Jackson Smith-Njigba. And then after that, I would probably say Zay Flowers from Boston College. I really, really like Zay. I think he should be a first-round receiver at the back end. I understand he's a little smaller, not quite the same physical talent as Quentin Johnston or as fast as Jalen Hyatt, but I think Zay Flowers is a really, really good receiver, and I think he'd be my number 3 receiver. I don't think that any of these guys are legit number 1s, but I think they're all pretty useful receivers. I think they're all pretty talented in their own right. I think some of these guys can carve out long careers as role players almost, as extra number 2s, a slot receiver type of deal. So yeah, I think that's where I would have these guys, but JSN is probably number 1. Not even probably, he definitely is.
And those are the 3 we kind of consistently see in these mock drafts. Those are the 3, and Zay Flowers really making some noise and skying up boards. But Luca, do you agree with Bradshaw with those 3, or do you think there's another guy who should be sneaking into the first round that Bradshaw didn't discuss?
No, yeah, I agree with Brad for sure. I think JSN is someone that, he's just so incredibly smart, and I don't care that he's a slot guy. People are calling him he's a slot receiver. You don't take him high. I don't care about that. Can he catch the football? Can he run routes? Is he smart? Breaking down zones? Yes. Checks all those boxes, and I'm good with that. I feel like a lot of times we know this with the combine, right? If you got a lot of speed, you can take guys over the top, you're going to be taken higher than maybe someone who's just more technically sound. But I think JSN is definitely the number 1. My biggest fear, guys, is that the Chiefs trade up and take Flowers. That would be my biggest fear, because I think he's that type of a twitchy player. Not saying that he's a Tyreek Hill, but when you look at him run routes and you see the way he runs and you see his first break out of a catch, it's it's like a knockoff Tyreek Hill. That's how jumpy, that's how quick he is. So I really like Zay Flowers a lot. He'd probably be my number two just because I think he's more of a playmaker than Addison. But I think Addison's a better route runner. So it depends on what you like. But I agree with Brad. Those are my top three for sure, and JSN clearly at number one.
Interesting. So those three again. And Jeff, do you
Mhm.
have anything different from those three? Because when I swing around, I'll give you guys my take. But it seems like Quentin Johnston, a lot of people talked about him as the number one, and he's just kept fading down the board. So is that the same case for you, or do you think he sneaks in the first?
I kind of don't think he does sneak into the first. I guess maybe just because I don't know. There's some issues people have brought up, especially with like his hands. Like if you watch a lot of his catches, even though they look kind of crazy, a lot of times he's catching them like right into his body, into his pads and stuff like that. And people don't like that. And I'm someone who also kind of doesn't like that. But I guess my only argument for Quentin Johnston is this: like if you're catching it, you're catching it. I don't think it necessarily matters how pretty it looks. But he's a special athlete too. So, man, I think honestly, I don't think he'll make it into this first round because I also think towards the back end there's less receiver needy teams. So unless someone trades up, I don't really see it happening. For my wide receivers, I'd probably go with Jordan Addison number one. I just like him a lot. I think the way he runs routes is really nice. He doesn't have that top end wide receiver speed that you'd like, but he's not slow per se either. And I think he's very quick, got really good hands. Obviously, he's a little bit undersized, so that's kind of an issue with him there. After that, I would say Zay Flowers. I really, really, really like Zay Flowers. I think he is special. I was actually going to say Luca compared him to Tyreek Hill. I would actually compare him more to Antonio Brown, to be honest with you. Just in, like the way he runs routes, the cutting, all that stuff, the quick footwork. Obviously, a bit of a smaller guy too, similar to Antonio Brown. Makes really good catches. I think he's a really special player. I wouldn't even be surprised if he's the first receiver taken off the board. There's been a lot of talk of him getting, his stock actually going up versus Quentin Johnston through this entire process. And last one I'll say, the one that I don't think anybody mentioned here is Cedric Tillman. I really, really like Cedric Tillman. Kind of reminds me a little bit of like Mike Evans, to be honest with you, the way he's like bigger, taller, not necessarily the fastest guy, but he's not slow either. I don't think he really lacks speed. He's got a lot of quickness too. I think he's definitely a special player. And he's another guy whose draft stock has been just going up and up and up throughout this process too, especially later on. So I would expect him to be in the first round, probably mid to late, I'll say.
It's interesting with these Tennessee guys because you mentioned the one receiver in Tillman and the other one who we haven't mentioned yet, and he's been falling down boards is Jalen Hyatt because everyone thought he was going to run a 4.2 at the combine, runs a 4.4. I think again, game speed is different than speed at the combine. That's just a fact. But I'm kind of fading on Hyatt too because when you watch this offense, and I know that I'll get back to my rankings here. And that's something that's concerning a little bit with Hendon Hooker, other than the fact, tore his ACL and he's a little bit older. This offense is so ridiculous where it's free releases for these receivers. And that was the thing I just kept getting bugged with Hyatt. I put in my number 7 receiver was the ball's snapped, there's stack formation, free release down the seam, no one even close to him. Same thing, wheel route, free release, boom, like touchdowns. And that's causing Hooker wide open throws, wide open touchdowns, and ends up throwing 27 touchdowns and 2 picks. So it's going to be interesting with these Tennessee guys. And you mentioned Tillman, who might be more just a do-it-all receiver, whereas Hyatt was just home run hitter. And watching the tape, every single thing from Hyatt was just seam, sluggo, everything. There was no in and out of breaks, no comebacks. The route running wasn't very polished at all. And that was something I caught. And that's something I love to see in these receivers is in and out of breaks. And the route running is such an important factor today. And Jeff, you mentioned the body catching. And I agree with you. I don't like body catchers as well. I think something that's more concerning is when guys are jumping and body catching at the same time, especially at routes over the middle of the field. That's where you get blown up. But body catching, I think is kind of less looked at today because you look at a guy like Justin Jefferson, he is a body catcher, which makes me mad when I'm watching him. I go, what are you doing? But then you go, oh, he's setting records every single time he's on the field. So I think as long as you can produce it into yards after the catch, it's okay. And speaking of that, these number one was JSN for me as well. And I wanted to fade on him. I wanted to go, I don't know. And I think Luca, you mentioned the slot position, and it's the same thing. You come back with Jefferson. Is Jefferson played primarily in the slot at LSU, right? It was Chase and Marshall on the outside, and people wondered that. Well, can he play outside? Yeah, most of these guys in the slot can play outside. Doesn't matter. If you haven't seen it, doesn't mean they can't do it, right? And he just has everything. I guess the one thing that we really didn't see enough of is his jump ball ability. If they're throwing a fade in the corner of the end zone, which again is not the smartest play anyway, it's kind of a outdated play, but we didn't really see that on tape. But everything else, you just watch that Utah game in the Rose Bowl, and 15 catches, 347 yards or whatever, 5 touchdowns, or 3 touchdowns. Sorry, he's fantastic. Addison, I like too. He was my number 3, and Jeff, same thing. He does everything, right? Route running, reliable hands. He's a little bit smaller, but he can win in multiple different ways. Zay Flowers I had as my 5. And the thing with Flowers, there was nothing on tape that I saw that really excited me. I think there was a lot of smaller size, but yards after the catch, fine hands, put up some solid numbers. But for me, the one that's, I think, a similar player to Flowers, but maybe just a little bit smaller, and he's my number 2 receiver. I think he's going in the second round regardless, is Josh Downs out of North Carolina. Every single play he was playing bigger than his size, which is something you love to see. A 5'9" guy, 170. And it's Drake May and Sam Howell throwing him jump balls, and he's coming down with it, which is ridiculous. He does everything well, right? Hands catcher, can high point it, good body control, route runner. And the one thing I love too, and that's what makes this receiver class so wild, is consistent production. There's 2 guys. Addison, when he did it at Pitt, I believe he won the Biletnikoff or was runner-up, had 1,500 yards. This past year of Caleb Williams, close to 1,000 yards. Downs, as a junior, 1,000+ yards. This past year, 1,000+ yards. Everywhere down the board, we don't have that, right? Even Jackson Smith-Njigba, right? We had the freshman year, like maybe 300 yards. Monster year, playing with Olave, playing with Wilson, 1,500 yards. And this past year, however many yards it was, like 100, right? He only really played in like 3 games, right? We didn't really have that. Quentin Johnston, a monster year of TCU. He looked like a real freak. Years before that, like 20 catches, 30 catches, under 400 yards. A little wild to see. There's more guys we can talk about too, but that was the one thing that I loved with Downs, and that's why I think he'll be a really sneaky pick. I had him at 2. Obviously, I think Jackson Smith-Njigba, he's a top 15 pick. I'd be surprised if teams like Houston with their second round pick or Tennessee don't take him, but I don't think there's any consistency with this wide receiver board, because you guys had some kind of along the same lines there, and then I'm going a different way, and we don't know where all these guys are going to land. Jeff, you mentioned Tillman could sneak into the first round. I didn't even have him in my top 7, and it's just wild to see. Bradshaw, coming back to you, is there a player in this wide receiver class we didn't mention that you think should be getting a little bit more love, that's maybe in that mid-tier or mid-round range that you like?
Goddamn right there is.
I bet.
West Virginia. You know it. Bryce Ford Wheaton, my man, my athletic freak. I love my athletic freaks. I love my West Virginia Mountaineers. So it's nice they go hand in hand. I obviously I was going to pick him, but I genuinely do like him quite a bit. I genuinely do like Bryce. I know he's kind of similar to Quentin Johnston in terms of he doesn't always catch with his hands. He's got a lot of drops. But I think he was underutilized at West Virginia. I think Neil Brown really hindered his development, which kind of frustrated me watching, because you could see it on film. You could see that he's an athletic guy, but he didn't always have the quarterback play. He didn't always have the offense suited around him. So I think because of that, he should be going a little higher than people are projecting him. I think I see people like he's going as low as like the 7th round or something, but like I've seen as high as like the 5th. But I think if you get him in the right offense and get him the right development, I think he could really develop into a nice like number 2, number 3 receiver because of his athletic gifts. He's big, he's tall, he's fast, but he just didn't have the quarterback play or the offense to really develop or shine at West Virginia, which is kind of not how it's always been at West Virginia. Guys like Tavon and Seven Bailey and Kevin White. You've had guys come out, but this is one of the these past few years under Neil Brown. We haven't always had the best offense or the best quarterback play for a receiver to shine. So I think it'll be interesting to see where Bryce goes, and if he can go somewhere that will actually utilize him and help him develop into the receiver that his athletic profile suggests he could become.
Of course, if the Mountaineers come up, you got to mention them.
Listen, other positions I might not, but this one I genuinely do believe in Bryce quite a bit.
I remember, was it at the Combine or was it his pro day? He put up some decent numbers, or were you just kind of gushing over him?
It wasn't D. He was legitimately like one of the best like Combine performers of like the last little while. Like he was really, really good. Like his athletic, like I'll pull it up in a second, but his numbers from the Combine were legitimately really good. And I think that should I wanted people to see that. I want people because people don't watch West Virginia unless they're like actually good, and they haven't been these last few years. So he put up legitimately good numbers. So it just made me happy to see that, like, okay, he might actually get a little bit more love and might actually go up draft boards a little bit more, might get a little bit more attention.
Luca, is there somebody for you that's sticking out, right? Because we mentioned the kind of the main guys, and each of us has kind of picked somebody else that we really liked. Is there somebody for you who you think we should keep an eye on?
Yeah, there's always going to be a guy, I think, in the fourth round that just comes out of nowhere. That's kind of how you win football games, really. I think Mims, from Oklahoma, Mims Jr. could be a good addition late. Again, he's got some drop issues, you could say. He loses concentration at times, but you know why? He's like 5'11". I think he ran under a 4.4. And I like him. I think he can be a good addition to a team in the late rounds. This is where you kind of get value in these receivers because, listen, if you're a draft prospect, you can catch the football. Yeah, you can catch the football. You can run routes, and a lot of the the question marks around him are he was schemed open, right? But like it doesn't mean that he can't get open, right? That's just the way that the offense was kind of built towards. Like you kind of said with Jalen Hyatt, we haven't seen it, right? Like you said, just because he plays in the slot doesn't mean he can't do it. And so these guys are obviously good for a reason. They can run routes. They can catch a football. You just got to put them in position to do that. And I think, if you put him at the next level and you give him that chance, I think he could be a good starter. I'm not saying he's going to come in here and be, the best receiver in the league, but he could be a serviceable starter for your team. And I think if teams are always looking for depth at wide receiver, he could be a steal in the late round. So I think Mims Jr. is someone that's going under the radar, but could be a solid pick.
And there's always with these, with this position in the draft, feels like people are scared to make those picks in the first round, and then all of a sudden to run on them. And they go 3 receivers in the teens, and then teams go, shit, I got to get up there and get one of these guys. Mm-hmm. So that it ends up being, from what we think, 3 receivers, maybe 4, ends up being 6 in the first round, which wouldn't surprise me, right? Teams are passing the football way more than ever and then need more weapons. Speaking of weapons, tight ends. We haven't really had a decent tight end class in a while, right? It just feels like there's usually just one guy, and obviously – I don't think we had a first rounder last year, if I'm mistaken, in the first round. But the year prior, we had Kyle Pitts going into the top 5. But this year, I think there's a chance we get 3 tight ends in the first round, potentially even 4. Jeff, of these tight ends, Mayer, Washington, who's kind of just a freak. Dalton Kincaid was somebody who came on late. Daniel Jeremiah had him as a top 10 player. Where do you think are good landing spots for these tight ends?
That's a good question. Landing spot. I mean, that's the thing. It's we know with tight ends, generally it takes about a year to get them going. Usually they're not as polished. They're just generally mismatches kind of, which is what they're so great at doing. If I'm going to assume Washington's going to be the first one off the board, even though I do think like there's definitely like a lot to his game that you might not like, except blocking. I think he's a really, really good blocker. I feel like he doesn't really lack anything there. If I were to assume that Washington would come off the board, gosh, I would say a team like a sneaky team that might get him is someone like Dallas, who has pretty much like everything else going for them. It's just like, why wouldn't you add that extra piece? A, it's an extra blocker. B, it's an extra pass catcher who, doesn't need to be an impact player right away. I think that would be like perfect for him, where he gets, great quarterback play, has a lot of offensive weapons around him. We know, like I said, the Cowboys have been loading with Brandon Cooks. They have so many other guys around him that he doesn't need to be the guy, and can, like I said, really help in the run game as their O-line is getting a little bit older and starting to fade a little bit. So I think he would be kind of honestly a steal in the late rounds, and it would just be like a typical Dallas Cowboys pick, I think.
It's an interesting one. Yeah, because, I just checked the mock draft quick, right? Because I guess they let Schultz walk, so they need another weapon there. Another one I do think is an obvious one. Cincinnati, I don't think has a tight end on the roster right now. They need one bad. And just Hayden Hurst did a lot for their offense last year, just being kind of that safety for Burrow. So adding another guy there would be huge. I can think about some other teams too. Green Bay, they
Green
might
Bay's
need
been
one,
a popular one for mayor, especially.
which makes a ton of sense, right? He played school
Yeah.
sort of in that Midwest area. Is there other teams out there, Bradshaw, you think should be reaching for one of these tight ends, or do you think differently than Jeff? He thinks Washington's first one off the board. Do you like Mayer better, or Kincaid, or the kid out of Oregon State?
I think Mayer's most likely to be the first tight end off the board. It kind of depends what you want. Like if you need more of an inline blocker, I think Washington would be your guy. But I think he needs to develop in so many other areas. He's so raw as a catcher. I don't think teams would be as likely to take a chance on him. Whereas Mayer is like already like he's a really great pass catcher and he's already a weapon for you in the passing game. He's not a great blocker by any means. But I think we've seen these last few years, especially with like someone like Kyle Pitts. Different type of athlete, but they're more willing to take a chance on a guy who's okay. He's a really good pass catcher. We can worry about the blocking later, whereas he's going to be like an extra receiver type of deal. So I think in terms of that, Mayer might go first. I think I could even see Kincaid going in the first round as well. But I definitely think with how talented Mayer is, I think he's probably going first. I think I know it's the popular pick, but I really do think the Packers are going to take him. I think it would shock me if all the tight ends were still on the board, they didn't go with Michael Mayer. I think he's a better. I think I would especially if JSN's off the board too. He's the next best offensive weapon, not named Bijan Robinson. So and they just need so much talent with their pass catchers that I think they have to go with something like Mayer.
Wow. And that's a perfect lead in, right? Because Luca, I was going to ask you, there is a ton of weapons here. Obviously, the receivers, there could be 5 in the first round. Tight ends could be 3. We know there's going to be a 1 running back going in the first round, and that's Bijan Robinson. Yeah. But how high do you take a player like him? Just because, running backs, I don't think this would be kind of the first guy in a while where we go, maybe there's a chance we go top 10, but we haven't seen that in a little while. Where do you see not necessarily the team, but the range that Bijan falls, and where do you think it's fine? Where you go, I'm comfortable. He's that talented of a player.
Man, I think if you take him, like, for example, Philly takes him at 10. I'm like, okay, well, sure. Might as well, right? But I think a guy like that, like, listen, I don't know how long you're going to get out of him. If you get, 5-7 years out of him, that's still really good. Like if you get a 5 to 7 year starter in the National Football League, the most violent sport, and he plays 7 years, that's really good. So I'm not too worried about the running back. Oh, you don't take a running back. The thing is, I just don't want a team to reach on him that isn't good, because then you're just going to run him into the ground. It just doesn't make sense. I think I'd feel comfortable taking him, maybe around like a 16 to 26, like in there, like middle of the teens to like middle of the 20s. That's where I think he could start to go, and teams could start to trade up for him. Again, there are teams in there that could take him, right? Like, I don't know if the Chargers end up flipping Eckler in a week. That could be a really fun pick. I see a lot of people saying, oh, he should come to Dallas. Okay, maybe he could go to Dallas. Yeah, if maybe if the Lions want to, maybe take him and just add him into the backfield with that great offensive line. Like it all obviously depends on who's there, but I think the range for him would be middle of the teens to middle of the 20s. I think that's a safe pick. If he goes earlier, okay, depending on the team. If he goes later, it's a steal. So he's just so versatile. You can do so many things. I feel like the word versatile is thrown out way too much during the draft process. But he is literally a one-of-a-kind running back, and is going to change any team if he's used properly. So I think that's a safe range on where he'll go.
Jeff, what do you think? Because I'm just looking at the draft board, and you go, like Luca mentions Philly, makes sense, loaded roster, not a ton of holes. And then I'd be a little upset if he went to one of those teams just after Philly, because you go, guys, you need way more than just a running back. So I think it makes sense in that 20s range. Could even see a team trade up, right, Jeff? What do you think?
Well, it's funny because like there's so many teams that like that are like either playoff contenders or like 100% in maybe even Super Bowl contention or division winning contention, essentially, that have top picks in the top 10. But I don't think you want to pay that much for him when you can get so many other players. Again, not that Bijan isn't very good. I think he is really good. And I really agree with what Luka said pretty much all around. He's just a really special player. And I also agree with the fact that, like, listen, your window for a championship is about 4 years anyways. So, like, get as many good players as you want. Like, Christian McCaffrey was an impact player for the 49ers. I think adding him to that roster helped them a ton. So having a guy like Bijan Robinson, I think, is going to do similar things for you. Obviously, like the comparisons between him and Saquon, the only thing you hope there is just that he's less injury prone than Saquon is, that he holds up a little bit better than Saquon did. I think I would say probably middle of the first round. I think it's a team that where they're looking at their team and they're saying, you know what, we could use a really explosive home run hitter that the defense has to address, especially in, like, short yardage situations, and that can also break off a big run. A home run hitter in a running back is, rare to find nowadays. So I would say one of the teams that Luka mentioned, actually, I think would be perfect for him, because I don't really see them picking a quarterback, at least in the first round, which would be the Detroit Lions, who I think could see themselves very easily winning the NFC North with the way all the other three teams are looking, other than the Vikings, obviously, Nolan. They could use that to make their very explosive offense even more explosive. And if they do take a quarterback, like they say it's a young quarterback, you have a guy that can easily hand it off to and do a lot of damage with a very good O-line. I think that would be the absolute perfect fit for him if I were to construct one. I don't see a team like the Ravens picking that. I think what looks like Lamar Jackson's going to be staying there. You probably want either an offensive lineman or another pass catcher of some kind in there. I don't think they would get a running back. I think they know that their running game is going to be good regardless of that. So I don't see them or like the Chiefs picking someone like that. I think it would be someone like the Lions, who's right on the cusp and would kind of want to ensure their playoff spot next year after a good couple of years building up.
I honestly don't know where he's going to land, because I'm looking, and if the Chargers make sense, but holy shit, am I going to fucking hate if another running back who's talented goes to the Chargers? Let Herbert cook. I know they're going to have a new offense, but that's just, it's frustrating. And I wonder if it's frustrating for Bradshaw right now, because when we last talked, I believe the Falcons, you had said, were the favorite betting-wise for where Bijan is going to land. Do you like that, or do you only like that if the Falcons move back?
I really struggled with how I feel about where you draft Bijan, because I've obviously been you don't draft running backs the first round. Running backs you don't need them. But with when there's two factors with this. One, Bijan is an incredibly special player. He's an incredibly talented runner and pass catcher. Two, the draft this year sucks. There's not many high-end players. It's not a deep draft. The draft kind of sucks this year. So if you're a team, whether it's the Falcons at 8, whether it's the Eagles at 10, I don't think it'd be the Eagles at 10. They're kind of more analytically driven, and I think they really don't care about drafting a running back that high. Whether you're 8 or lower, if you're wherever you're sitting and you think there's not a blue chip player left on that draft board, and you think there's guys we don't like all the guys available that are at fill our needs, whether it's tackle, receiver, like if JSN's gone and you're staring at Jordan Addison, you're like, well, we could have Jordan Addison, or we could have Bijan Robinson. You're staring at the draft board, you're like, oh, okay, well, Christian Gonzalez, Devin Witherspoon, Joey Porter, they're all gone. Need a corner, but there's this incredibly special talent still on the board. I don't see why you don't take it. If you think he is the best player on your draft board and you think he is going to be better than everybody else that's left, you have to take it. It's mismanagement to not take the best player on the board just because you're like, well, I guess he's a running back, and I guess he's only going to play for 4 or 5 years. If you're going to elite play for 4 or 5 years over a guy who's going to give you mediocre play for 7, I don't know. I think I'd rather just have Bijan at that point. I think you got to take the special player if he's available. There's not another player like him, and you could make the argument, aside from Jalen Carter or Will Anderson, he's the best player in the draft. Relative to his position, and also just how incredibly talented he is. So if there's not another blue chip player on that draft board and you want to take Bijan, I don't see why you don't. I wouldn't be mad at it. If the Falcons think that all these other pass rushers suck after Tyree Wilson and Will Anderson, I wouldn't be mad at it, I guess. But It would just kind of depend on how the board fell and what your draft board looks like. But I wouldn't be mad at it if they took Bijan at 8, as long as there are other talented players not on the board anymore.
It literally is like the widest range of where he could fall. Because if you saw him go in the top 6, you go, oh, we're looking at this. He's a top 5 player. It's just positional value. Like you mentioned Anderson, you mentioned Carter. He is there. Everybody knows it. But they go, positional value. Might need a quarterback. Receivers are more important. He could land anywhere in this draft, and it could surprise us regardless. But I guess we'll make that decision ourselves when we do our mock draft next week. That's going to do it, guys. Cover 4 podcast. Went over the defensive positions last week, a little bit of the offensive weapons this week. Of course, we talked about the quarterbacks. We're going to patch them all together with our mock draft next week. So keep your eyes open for that. It's Bradshaw, it's Luca, it's Jeff. I'm Nolan. We'll see you guys soon.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please drop a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Lingo Sports and Lingo News for a whole lot more just like this.